Hello and welcome to another episode of Shoot the Artist, the podcast where we talk to a whole range of different people from the entertainment industry. As always, I'm your host, Oliver Rednall, and the guest in this episode, it was a pleasure to talk to him, television and film director Adam Wimpenny, who brought Hotel Portofino, the period drama, 12 episodes, 2 seasons for ITV, 2-hour screens. If you haven't checked the show out yet, I recommend you do so. It's an excellent series, excellent costumes, excellent setting, and brilliant performances. He's done an excellent job with that. Did I mention that it was excellent? I don't think I did. But anyway, it's a great show. Wonderful, wonderful show. Really well written and really well paced. So many different underlying stories weaving in with each other. It was an absolute pleasure to watch. He's done a wonderful job on that. In the podcast, we delve deep into how adding little details into the filming and how to create that sort of period look in Italy at that time, and all the different challenges and considerations one has to think about when directing that. So I recommend you check that out. Anyway, let's get on with the show. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
You've got an excellent background. This is my actor's plain wall, and you've got a superb museum of musical instruments and everything.
This is I very smartly built a studio at the bottom of the garden
to nice.
Have some space from the family. I mean, the family are down here quite a lot because we use it to watch movies and to do music and stuff like that. But anyway, it's my little play den where I get creative.
And is this Raiders of the Lost Ark I see here behind you?
Yeah, do you know what? I used to live in Greenwich for a long time. There's an amazing place called the Flood Gallery, which I don't know if it's still open, but they imported all these posters from overseas where they do like one-off screenings of movies, and they do like bespoke posters for them. So yeah, I've collected quite a few of them.
I love that. I love when you see artists' impressions of their own versions and stuff. It's so good. They'll just do really simple ones. I saw one of the usual suspects where it was just some footsteps and then a couple of footsteps going off to like the left. Or
yeah.
You have to think about it.
They're really good. They're a bit cryptic. Yeah. It's very smart.
It.
No, I like all that stuff. I've bought quite a few of them over the years.
What's your favorite one that you've got?
That is a good one. Do you know what? I actually have a really good one that's up in the bathroom downstairs, which actually has they're almost like trump cards from different movies. So every letter of the alphabet has like a silhouette from a different movie.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah. I think I've seen it.
Have to try and work it out. So it's got like Nosferatu and Shaun of the Dead and Reservoir Dogs. It's really good.
Oh, excellent.
And people spend too much time in the bathroom.
Well, that's it.
I did. Yeah. I mean, the story is my parents go out to Spain a couple of times a year, so I actually jumped on board and went out to spend a week with them, and it was a really wet, wild week. Where it just rained for the entire week. So I spent most of the time sitting in my bedroom sending emails, which is fine. It was good. It was a good excuse to do some work anyway.
Yeah, excellent. And the commercial you did, with the commercial, how quickly you brought on? Is it something that's planned for a long time in advance? Because I know when actors are brought on, it's sometimes on Monday you'll be doing this commercial and it's all very last minute.
Commercials, they always seem to come from behind. I think they're in gestation for a long, long time, but then suddenly they'll want it yesterday, and you're chasing a tail for everything. So they're always quite they're exciting because it's like this sort of whirlwind of activity for a week, but then it's done and it's finished, and you don't have to worry about it again. So I was doing a little project last week, and that was good.
And do you sit in on the edit, or do the people at the agency do they have their own team for that?
It depends really. I mean, with that one, I shot it and I stepped back from it. But I mean, quite often I get fairly heavily involved in the editing process. I mean, that's where all the fun comes into it really, because you have 1,000 options and try and cook it up in the edit.
I rewatched the first season of series, I should say, of Hotel Portofino, and I was thinking about how, because TV shows are generally sold now, I guess, in batches of whatever it is that the network or studio or streaming service have decided. It's in this one because is it six episodes, isn't it, or is it 8? 6 episodes.
Six, so
Yeah.
2 seasons.
I
Six
thought
each, yeah.
everything in it, it's so well balanced, and it's so well, there's no sort of cramming things in or stretching things out. Everything
Mm.
sort of sat so nicely, and I didn't feel overwhelmed by any particular part of it. But with some, like say Netflix, for example, I know I think the chaps at Lost, when they did Lost, when before streaming came in, they were going to do
Mm.
seasons of it. And then they were like,
Yeah.
can you do like 5 or 6? And they were like, not really. And
Mm.
they're like, well, you're going to have to. And they kind of had to just string it out. Have you ever felt that kind of pressure to draw something out longer than it you may have had the idea of, or the material that's been brought to you?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think a lot of the best shows recognise when the series has run its course. But I think with Hotel Portofino, they were just nice, self-contained seasons where they had a gentle arc which would follow through. And I think each episode, well, each series was designed to sort of bring in, the fascism and the darkness. And it was kind of like series one was to try and set up the status quo of this, like, lovely, gentle paradise where this British family come in and try to romanticize uh, the setting because Bella, played by Natascha
Mhm.
McElhone, she has an affinity with Italy. She wants to take a family out there and start afresh. But unbeknownst to the family, you've got um, fascism, which was just starting to take a hold in Italy in the 1920s,
Mm.
and Mussolini was just starting to come into prominence. And everybody was watching it from afar, not really quite aware of where it was going to go. So it's sort of teasing all that up. So I think each season sort of, the impact of those sort of ideals will come into their world more and more.
Yeah,
But
and that's
I think,
and to the
but
audience that it's looming on the horizon, isn't it? We know it, and we sort of like see snippets of this, and then the sort of resistance with the giving out of the flyers and things like that, because we know, because
yeah,
obviously it's a historical
mm,
thing. But it was interesting to see that, because you don't really see that often. Most of the time, you see the World War One, World War Two, but it's rare to sort of see the build up. With people going about their normal business, maybe for this example in a foreign country, and seeing that sort of looming on the horizon, and that which is going to obviously change their lives completely in the next few years.
well, I think when I was reading the scripts written by Matt Baker, who came up with the idea with the team at Eagle Eye, they were. Um, I thought it was quite timely that it was practically 100 years in the past, but actually you can sort of see parallels to what's going on in society today. I mean, I always think good historical dramas are a bit of a mirror to the time that you're living in present day anyway. So this idea of sort of, gently standing by and watching, these larger than life characters sort of take a hold and people not really, paying too much attention to it. That slow danger of just like, this kind of, slowly leaving the door open for sort of dangerous ideals to come in and sort of become normalized. But
Mm.
but at the same time, I mean, if you've seen the show, you can see that it's sort of, it's also like a celebration of senses and sort of escapism. And you've got these gorgeous locations where, in the 1920s, it was a time just after World War One where so many young people had lost their lives, or their lives had been completely put on hold or compromised by this terrible waste of humanity. And I think when people sort of started living their lives again in the 20s, sort of became this very exciting time of, I mean, you could say hedonism, but creativity and people just trying to live a bit more of the moment. So things like food, music, and cars and design, and all those things. When you look at it, in the sort of historical time capsule, it's an amazing period of time. I mean, the creativity that came out of all of that. So it was a fun thing to explore for the series.
Yeah, the Roaring Twenties, the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a
and
great
it's nice.
period.
It's nice to see that sort of reflection of today's society. And I thought it was done quite subtly as well. It wasn't anything too like shoved in your face. It was just kind of hinted at and done quite tastefully. Because sometimes things
Mm.
can be a bit too, or like maybe obviously or clumsily done. I think it was done quite nicely. Was that already
I think
written in the script, or was it something you sort of brought to it with the direction side of things?
I think all these things, it's a process, really, isn't it? You get given the scripts, you try and take all the information you can out of it. I think there was a lot of intent from the guys at Eagle Eye, so Eagle Eye Drama, the production company behind it, and Walter Isolino, who is one of the exec producers. He is from that part of the world where he grew up very close to Portofino and recognised it was like wonderful, colourful, interesting place to set a show like this. But then you start doing research with your HODs, and there's this lovely back and forth with the writer and the team where you're trying to find out things about that period of time that you've seen your own version of it on in TV shows and film, but then you have to start doing your own exploration yourself. Where, because I didn't know what the 1920s looked like in Italy, you start going through the history books and find all sorts of fascinating things. Where in the street scenes, you'd see young boys walking around with almost like a stick over their shoulder, where they would actually have pasta drying on a rack, and they'd walk around town with fresh pasta, selling it in the square. And they'd have people with old bicycles where they'd turn the pedals around, and they've modified the wheel going around into a knife sharpener. So people would go into the town and they'd pay a gentleman to sharpen their knives using this bicycle. So all these things that you would never have really dreamt of. You see these images in the 20s from Portofino, and then we were going, well, this is great. We've got to use this in the show. So actually, as a process, when we came to shoot the show, what I would try and do is actually fill all the production offices with images that we'd found and printed out, just so you're kind of surrounded by all these things, and it becomes a talking point, so that when the director of photography or a production designer comes into the room, you suddenly find yourself standing around these boards where just like this explosion of ideas in color, and you're going, oh, that's great, how about this, how about that, and it sort of permeates the production.
And I was looking at the light in the show is so, I don't want to say natural, but it has got that natural, lovely, open, bright look about it throughout the whole thing. Was that just luck? Obviously, there are obviously artificial lights put in there at some points, but were you just lucky with the weather?
Do you know what? It's interesting because I think right at the beginning of the project, we were having discussions about whether you do some of it in the studio, because obviously in the studio, it's much easier to control the lighting. I know other TV shows sometimes, like I think the Durrells quite smartly actually did use the studio for some of their interior locations because they could shoot them back in England and control the light. But when we were looking for a place that could actually be the hotel, we looked at lots of different locations and none of them were really working. But then we found this old private villa, which hadn't really been touched for a long, long time. And we could just see the potential of actually using the space as the actual hotel. And what was quite remarkable was that we had this version of the hotel which Matt, the writer, had created in his head. But then as we were walking around the space, you have to massage a few bits of geography and a few ideas have to swap around. But we were walking around going, this is the hotel. This is great. You've got the subterranean basement where all the staff are downstairs, and it's this lovely sort of winding catacomb of rooms. And then you've got the upstairs rooms where you had space for the living room and the dining room, and and the suites upstairs. And we were like, well, this is perfect. We can really work this and adapt it. And the appeal for me was that, unlike working in the studio, because it was a real location with beautiful gardens overlooking the sea, you can really make a virtue of that. So we explored perhaps more in season 2, but what you could do is you could take your Steadicam from the forecourt, go into the villa. We did a scene where we were following a couple of characters around all the different rooms, and then ended up going out onto the balcony where suddenly you're overlooking the sea, and you go, well, that's amazing. I mean, the production value of actually being able to do that and let the audience understand the geography of that space at the same time, is a real gift. But I mean, in terms of the lighting, you're always trying to cheat the light. I mean, this is one thing that I really came to learn and appreciate doing a project like this, is that throughout the day, you sit down with your assistant director and your DP, and you look at the schedule and you go, okay, today we have to do these 6 pages of material. We're going to start in the morning, but by 9 o'clock in the evening, we still need to be shooting some morning scenes. So the only way you can actually achieve that is by cheating it. So the days where it really mattered that you actually had natural Mediterranean sunlight coming through the windows, you go, okay, this is a really important scene. So we need to make sure we're shooting that scene at 11 o'clock so you can look through the windows and see the sea in the background. But then other scenes you would push later into the day. And actually, Errol, who's the DP, he had some great tricks for changing the lighting altogether. So you could actually nowadays you have these great big light mats that sit in a window just outside, all great big LED powered lights, where if you set it just right, it can actually feel like there really is natural daylight coming through the window. So there's always a bit of a cheat going on.
That's amazing.
But yeah, but the other thing as well is that you can never predict the weather, and we had couple of weeks where we had overcast days. So you spend a lot of time with the assistant director staring at the sun and the clouds, just crossing your fingers it's going to, the clouds are going to break and the sun will come through again. Especially for continuity, because sometimes you'd start shooting a scene, it'd be glorious sunshine, and you'd turn around and be trying to cover the rest of the scene, and then all the lighting would change. So you're going, right, what do we do? Do we start this whole scene from scratch because it's going to be cloudy for the rest of the day, or do you sit and wait? So that's always a challenge.
When you watch it with your family or anything that you've done, do you narrate and say, "Oh, this was a day where this didn't happen"? Do you feel yourself just like reliving everything that you went through while shooting?
You do, yeah. You sort of you. It's interesting. I've taken a bit of a step back from it and watched some of the episodes again recently, and you actually forget all the challenges that you went through and just sort of see it for what it is. But I think when you're with your family, there's always a million stories to tell. Actually, I was very lucky in that in season 2, my family came out and actually even ended up being extras in it for a couple of days because they'd seen season 1, and we had a break in the middle. So you're filming in blocks. So you maybe do like a 6-week period, then have a little hiatus in the middle, and then come back and shoot again. So they came out in the middle. The costume department did a beautiful job of giving my children like little sailors outfits, and they got to be guests in the garden, and my parents were there for a little while. It doesn't happen very often, but it's a bit like, look, it's free extras,
Yeah, and it's a nice location.
Well.
You're not up a mountain in sort of Norway or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a bit of an easier ask on that occasion.
Often was it a decision by the producers, or was it just because you were brought on early that you directed the entire series? Because quite often they'll have block where you say about the blocks, other directors will come on, or was it because you were editing afterwards? Because sometimes when they edit as they go along, am I right? They then bring in another director.
Yeah, I think it's quite rare. From what I know, I think usually a show of this scale would tend to have 2 to 3 directors on it. It's quite common that the directors would come in and do a block. But interestingly, the executives at Eagle Eye, they felt that it was preferable to have one director sort of authoring the whole series. And even though it does mean you've got a bigger workload, and it's quite a task to shepherd all 6 episodes all the way through. What it does give you is you've got a complete overview of the entire series, which I think is really nice because you can actually track it with all the actors. And I'm sure everybody knows this, but you very rarely get to actually shoot a show in sequence. It's always, you go in with the best intentions of trying to start an episode 1 and finish by episode 6. You can build up to those big climactic set pieces and hopefully have your actors have lived it, and gone through it. But, very quickly your assistant director sits there and goes, well, look, with the best will in the world, we just can't manage that. We're still going to have to move a lot of these scenes around. So as a director, it means that you can really sit down with the actors and kind of track the emotional, the emotional arc for all the different performances all the way through, which I think is a real luxury. And as well, you sort of, you can really work with the team to sort of author a bit of a look and a design as well. So rather than coming in and sort of being, I guess, a cog in the machine where you're servicing, just setting up the shots, you really are involved in, working with the musicians, working with the art department, trying to discover like a language of how you're going to shoot it. So I think, in terms of the camera style and the way we approach that, it was all quite, there's a bit of it's all quite harmonious, carried across the whole season.
And when you came out to do series 2, did you was that always a must? How early was it when you knew there was going to be a second series?
Well, season one, I have to say, was like a real gift to come on board and do, because the story was that in 2020, as you know, everybody was in lockdown. There was very little happening. And TV production really ground to a halt for a while. And then early 2021, I'd been talking to Eagle Eye. This project came up, and all the stars aligned, and they said, "Look, we'd love you to come on board and direct this season." So only a couple of months later, I was on a plane traveling out to Croatia, where we shot the show. And just so you're aware, the show is set in Portofino, but actually we doubled a lot of Portofino with Croatia, because Croatia, there's a region called Istria, which is in the northern section, which is only a couple of hours away from Italy. And when you go out there, it feels very Italian in terms of like all the fishing villages have that sort of vibrant coloration that you get, which is very unique to Portofino, but it's just a lot less gentrified. So you don't have all the difficulties of trying to film around the super yachts of Portofino, where it's all sports cars, and it's if you've ever been there now, it's a bit of a billionaire's paradise. So we went out to Croatia. We were working as this big ensemble, and it was like just a really lovely experience. I mean, we all felt very lucky to sort of be out in the sunshine with a nice team of people making a show like this after having such a sort of a write-off of a year. So actually, by the time season 2 came round, we sort of went into post and were editing, and at the same time, all the scripts for season 2 were being written whilst we were completing the post-production on season 1. So it sort of kind of rolled from one season into another. It never really stopped as a process, but I think it also seemed like an opportunity to sort of expand the world that we created. I thought, well, I've done season 1, and some of the scripts had been written before I was ever involved, and it was a nice opportunity to work alongside Matt the writer and kind of go, okay, now we know these characters and we know this world. How do you build on that setup for season 1 and expand on it? So so season 2 was more a case of trying to expand everything and just step it all up a gear.
Yeah, you wouldn't know, the buildings are so Italian looking. You would never have known it wasn't. And then obviously you have the sort of aerial shots of the hotel and the whole area, and that's blended in quite well. So no one would be none the wiser. And also, I think it's the last episode when they go to Genoa, is it Genoa? And was that shot in the same area, or did you have to go somewhere else for that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you're doing a production of this scale, it's a bit like every time there's a location move, it's a big number. You have so many costumes, you have so many extras. Trying to actually service it is quite a big number. So there's your brain's sort of working in two different ways. The creative part of you wants to go to where all the best locations are and sort of not really worry about traveling halfway across the country to find the right place. But then equally, every time you do a big location move, you're cheating yourself because you're basically taking time out of your shooting day to do that. So what we tried to do was we tried to find as many places local to where we were shooting as possible. I mean, if you've seen the show, what you'll see is that actually there's a little town called Apatia, which again is up in Istria. It's a very beautiful place where the hotel was set by the coastline. And actually around there, it works out really well because there's lots of lovely little mountainous villages where you don't actually have to travel too far to find very characterful little back streets and places like that. And they were nowhere near the sea. I mean, it was a complete cheat. We actually had a couple of things where we found places which were very elevated and up in the mountain. Yeah, we actually found a lot of beautiful little mountainous villages that actually were nowhere near the sea, but we thought that because they had cobbled streets and archways and things like that, they could actually double for the back streets of Portofino. So quite often we were putting bits of green screen at the ends of alleyways. So if you had a shot, you'd travel through an archway and you could composite in the sea or a background of the Portofino harbour, and you'd be filming, miles inland in a mountain village somewhere. And it all kind of came together in the end. We actually also did a lot of filming in Zagreb, which I'd never been to before, but that was a fascinating place because it's a beautiful city, but it has a lot of big period buildings, which work very well for the more kind of municipal type places and places like casinos. where you wouldn't really find that sort of thing by the coastline. And um, I mean, the story with Zagreb is there was a huge earthquake a number of years ago, which it only lasted about 10 seconds, but it did a huge amount of damage to the city centre. But as a result, there's quite a lot of buildings which are, kind of disbanded and haven't really been used for a long time, where they're waiting for renovation, but gave us an opportunity to go in and use some of these places, where you kind of go, okay, well, we can fix this up a little bit and actually turn this into like a 1920s apartment or or a museum. And then we had all the aerial shots of Portofino as well. So I mean, it's all a bit of smoke and mirrors of trying to tie the whole thing together. Where you've got we did about a week in Portofino to get lots of textural stuff and beautiful drone shots, and then you mix it all in with all the other stuff, and you actually forget after a while where you've shot a lot of these things anyway. You kid yourself when you watch it back and go, I can't remember where that was now.
Yeah. So you don't have a second unit that do all the aerial shots. You were there directing all of that as well.
I like to try and be there because
Yeah.
I think when you're shooting it, because you know how these things are going together, it almost feels like it's a missed opportunity not to be there. So yeah, I was doing a lot of the second unit all the way through, and anyway, I mean, it's not a hardship to go to these locations. So it's pretty nice. I mean, out of all the places you can go to, spending a few days in Portofino was not a bad choice.
Have you had any difficult jobs where you've had to go work in some like really poor conditions or like cold conditions, wet conditions?
Do you know what? It's interesting you mentioned that, because I went through a period of time where every time I seemed to be shooting a drama, it always happened at wintertime, and there was no rhyme or reason for it, but it was just I did a number of thrillers and crime series where you plan these things and you're never quite sure where it's going to land, and then you go, oh right, we're doing it in December again, and every time we shot these things, it sort of became a running joke that I ended up with snow in every production I did, which is great from a production value point of view, because it actually, funny enough, they always worked really well for the story, because we even had a few stories where I'd even spoken to effects team and said, look, I'd love to get some snow in this, and they were going, we can't afford it. And then the day you're filming, the snow comes down and you go, oh, okay, well, that was lucky timing. But it was always so cold and so difficult with the continuity, because you'd film one day and the next day you come back and all the snow's melted. It was very difficult. So I was like, look, I think in the future I need to find some projects where I'm shooting on a beach, sunny beach, in some Mediterranean climate. And then luckily enough, for the last few years, we've been doing Hotel Portofino, and I did a project in Spain as well. So, I've been quite lucky, but I've gone from this snow phase to doing my, sunny beach phase.
As a director, what do you think the audience's biggest misconception about what you do, about your job and thing? Because obviously it's a huge responsibility. Like when I saw you did both 12 episodes in total, but all 6 episodes of the first one, I was like, wow, that's quite a lot to do for one TV show. What do you think the audience often mistake that the responsibility of a director and all the things you have to consider?
Well, I think it's hard to sort of convey all the aspects that you're across unless you're actually spending some proper time with somebody, because I mean, the appeal for me working as a director is it's such a multifaceted, multidiscipline job. And what I do enjoy is I really like collaborating. I really like working with people. I enjoy the company of being on a set with lots of interesting, creative, inspiring people. And it's a really fun adventure. And I think, I like to think I've got an artistic enough eye to do some storyboards and have a bit of an idea of what I'm doing. But when you work with somebody who's maybe like a brilliant production designer or a costume designer, you're sort of giving them the crumbs, and then they'll run with it and turn it into something, bigger and wilder than you could have ever imagined. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. So I think maybe people think that directing is maybe coming to set and facilitating the shots and the performance of the actors. It's really kind of getting the story in the can. And I think in some jobs that can be the case, but I think the more rewarding side of being a director is trying to be there right from its conception, all the way through the process. Because I think a lot of the show is made in that very early stage of the process where you're not just inheriting a team and you're not just inheriting a locked script. It's that bit where you get into the really get into the guts of the story with a writer, and you develop it, and you choose your team, you bring them on board, and really, you sort of you build it up and see it, watch it grow as a project.
There was
and it comes.
No,
sorry, I was
Karen.
going to say it kind of comes out the other side as well. I mean, all the post production as well is very key. I mean, you were asking earlier about whether I shoot things and step away, but I really think you find the voice of the show and the style of the show in the post production. In the edit room and laying up the music. That's a really integral part of the process.
Yeah, it has a wonderful score to it. And there was one scene where I saw them just very briefly look down at a check that the American character, I forget Adam James's character, I forget the name of him.
Jack,
yeah, that's it. He'd signed it, and I thought the time that the production design have spent to make it look authentic and like the signature, everything. It was just in a flash gone. That people don't appreciate that, and it got me thinking about that side of things.
Well, do you know what? It's interesting because I've dabbled with period before, but I think when you actually go into something like, let's say, the environment of a hotel, where really every single thing that the characters touch and interact with has to be accurate to that period, and it has to have authenticity to it. And it's not only that it has to be period accurate; there has to be some logic for why the character of Bella would have chosen those things to be in a hotel, because Natascha's character Bella, she's a very creative, entrepreneurial sort of character who's basically set up this hotel, and the hotel is an amalgamation of all the things that she loves about British sensibilities and Italian sensibilities. So it's like this sort of mishmash of things where she's not trying to make a hotel just like a clone of a British hotel. She's gone there because she loves Italy, but then at the same time her British sensibilities will come across. So I think when we first got out to Croatia, what we came to realize quite quickly is that as beautiful as the locations were, it's very difficult to find the right props and the right pieces that would sort of fit within the story. So there was an awful lot of trial and error trying to find things where sometimes we'd dress a table and say, okay, let's have a look at how Bella would choose to do a silver service. What would her choice of glasses be like, and what would her plates be like? And and sometimes you find stuff and it would be the best that we could find in the area, and you go, it's not bad, but we're gonna have to go further afield. So it actually got to the point where we were having to bring things in from Munich and other places, and maybe fly things in from London to try and make it accurate. Because if you've got a big close up of something on a table, it has to hold up. So I mean, it was a learning curve for me. I mean, it's something I've never really got into, but it's fascinating just to see that level of detail going through a production department like that.
And what made you want to go into directing? Has it been something that you've always done, from sort of been drawn to from a very young age, or was it because you went into live TV, we were talking before about, and then you took the jump into more sort of narrative television?
Well, I grew up in Huddersfield, which is a little town in the Pennines between Leeds and Manchester. And it was a very beautiful spot, but we lived in a tiny village just outside of Huddersfield where it was very rural. There wasn't a huge amount to do. And I think when I was quite young, you're always trying to look to make your own entertainment. So for me, it was always about picking up a camera. I think my dad bought a little high-8 camera when I was about 10 years old, and I used to play around with it. We used to make little horror films and sequels to movies that we'd just seen at the cinema, and you get all your mates to come over for a weekend, and usually it was pretty anarchic. I mean, we ended up doing all sorts of crazy, dangerous stuff that I'd be mortified if my children tried to attempt. but it was all about the production value. It was like, how do you create, something from nothing, and like special effects and things blowing up and things that give me the fear thinking about what we did back then. But but it was like, I got very excited by the idea of thinking, well, this is great fun, and what if you could do this for a job? And I think every time I used to go to the cinema, because there wasn't much to do. If I went to see like a Spielberg movie, I think I saw E.T. when I was about 7, and I was given. My parents bought me a copy of the program, where I don't think we do that these days, but because it was such a big event, you got the ET manual and opened up the pages and you saw pictures of Spielberg directing, the Elliot in the film, and you just go, God, that's unbelievable. Somebody's actually doing this for a job. So I kind of kept on pursuing that path and thought, well, one day I'd love to, travel further afield, and took myself off to London, and that was kind of, that was my breakaway, which got me into my life in London, where I went to film school and have been ever since.
There's no trace of an accent, Huddersfield accent.
It's funny. It comes out if I've had a few drinks in a northern pub. Yeah, I spent more of my life down here than back in Yorkshire now, but it's hidden there somewhere.
So you were sort of like guerrilla filmmaking in your teens then?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, it was all very practical. It was a case of grab a camera, look at what locations you could use. Who owns a biker jacket? Who's got some latex makeup? You just kind of use what we had to make these little films, and it was all very hands-on and practical. But I think where that was really helpful for me was that when I got to, when I went to film school, I spent my 3 years trying to do all the practical film work and try and make as many short films as possible, and come out of the degree with a show reel. But when I actually finally got my foot in the door of the industry and started directing TV shows, I think that kind of scrappy, just all hands to the pump kind of attitude really helped with making my first few things, because there were no rules. It was just like, how do you make this with no money? And quite often in TV, I think when you're starting out as a young director, you're expected to try and conjure something from nothing. So, you kind of go, okay, well, let's find some creative way of doing this. So I don't think I've ever had a career where I've been like awash with money and, facilities, and just sort of sat back and gone, this is what I would like. It's always just like reverse engineered of like, okay, this is the objective. How do we achieve it? Knowing all these, hands-on approaches that we've learned.
Yeah, but I think that's great, because sort of invention is bred from necessity, isn't it? So when you need to do something, you sort of find a way of doing it and getting together, like you said, the resources that you can.
Mm-hmm.
How is coming to like a big series, like 6 episodes or 12 episodes in total with the second series, from doing film prior to that, because you did film like horror films and things like that. How did you approach it compared to doing something like that? What were the sort of major differences?
I think the first thing that occurred to me was that it was just there's a lot more resources to hand, and you have a lot more people to help you in every respect. I think my earlier films that I'd done in the past, you there was always this slight fear of delegating, so you're kind of very much in there and trying to be involved in everything so much. And I think when you actually get to work on a bigger project like a show like Hotel Portofino, you realize that actually, it's the best thing you can do is sort of like filter the information, sort of talk to the teams, be there to sort of be across stuff in terms of ideas, but you can really trust people to get on with coming up with the creative solutions themselves. Because I mean, the truth is, you just don't have. I mean, I think when you're trying to hold 6 episodes in your head and going, right, okay, in the next 60 days, we need to create 6 hours worth of high quality material. It's a tall order. You cannot take that all on yourself. So you have to rely on your team around you a lot more, I think.
And in terms of, obviously, you started very young, the interest in filmmaking. Who are your main? You spoke about E.T. a little bit earlier, but who are your main sort of influences, do you think, that sort of stuck with you, that you look to as a kind of idol, if you like?
My tastes have always been pretty broad. I have to say, the early Spielberg films were always just so magical for me. And just when I used to watch his films, it felt like concentrated emotion. I'd come out of the cinema going, "Oh, I've never felt that before. That's just amazing." And so I'd watch E.T. or Close Encounters or Jaws. I mean, Jaws is my favorite film, and it's the simple 3 men in a boat story where it's brilliant characters, but just a brilliantly told story. And that's what I love about that film so much. But my tastes are really quite broad. I mean, I love musicals. I love horror. I do really like horror. I mean, horror. I think it's because it's such a primal response when you go to see a horror film. I like the simplicity of like a director with not a lot of resources, but some clever point of view and interesting storytelling can really generate something from nothing. So actually, guys like Peter Jackson, I was always fascinated with his early career because I mean, talking about plucky filmmakers, I mean, he was a guy who really made a whole film industry in New Zealand from nothing when he used to make his little films on a Super 16 and go off with his mates at weekends making his movies, which took years to make sometimes. A proper labor of love.
Yeah, he had a huge jump when he did Lord of the Rings. I mean, he did Heavenly Creatures, didn't he, with Kate Winslet?
That's right. Yeah.
In the late 90s, I think, or mid to late 90s. And then I think, was it New Line was the last cinema to take, the last studio to take on Lord of the Rings, I think. He went to so many different ones.
I think so. I think it was with Miramax for a while and then parted ways, and then New Line took a punt, and it was a very good punt.
Definitely. And to make all three films.
Well out of it from it.
And to make all three films rather than go, just do one and we'll see how it goes. It's like we'll do all three at once.
There's an amazing book written by I forget his name, but he was one of the journalists who used to write for Empire magazine. But he did this brilliant book about the making of Lord of the Rings. And actually, when you realise what they were up against and the amount of times that the project sort of folded and looked like it wasn't going to happen, and he was, Peter Jackson was like very, very much sticking to his guns about, just not wanting to compromise the film. He had a line in the sand and just held his nerve and got the film made. It's pretty remarkable.
Would you like to do something on a really huge scale, like a special effects picture?
I'd love to. Yeah, I think there's a danger in that. I've seen quite a lot of young film directors make an interesting indie and then get picked up by the studios, and I think it's very easy to get sort of swallowed up into that system where, going back to my point about servicing the direction of camera angles and performance, I think sometimes directors who make that jump very quickly could find themselves in an environment where they don't really get that much creative control. But I would love to do it one day. I mean, I'd like to do it in a way where I feel like I've earned my stripes and work my way up to it. I'd love to do a few more films where it's in a region where I could execute them to the level where I can, put my vision on screen, but not be beholden to all the politics and too much money pressure at the same time. But yes, one day I'd love to have a go.
Because I guess with franchise, I mean, I guess Lord of the Rings was kind of separate because it wasn't part of a bigger sort of conglomerate of films. But certainly with sort of the superhero franchise and things like that, they get a lot of notes from the producers and coming in and saying you can't. That's why there's always like a Zack Snyder cut of Batman or whatever it is that he's doing afterwards, which is completely different from the original release.
Well, I mean, there's not that many auteur filmmakers who've really built up the body of work where you can go, they are uniquely, that's them and that's the vision, and there's no taking away from that. But I think if you actually get into that very privileged position where you are one of those filmmakers, where you really can sort of uncompromisingly make your films. You look at people like Christopher Nolan. I mean, he's the epitome of that, isn't he? He really just has a very clear idea of the films he wants to make, and they're supported. And the studios are behind those sort of things. I think we're in an interesting time at the moment where I think the studios have had so much power for a long time making these successful franchise films, but now there's been a bit of a wobble, and I think the audience has their interest is starting to wane a bit, and they're looking elsewhere to try and get their fixes. I think it's actually going to force the studios to be less conservative and actually make those bolder choices, which will, because if you can make a really exciting film that gets attention, say like Saltburn. I mean, it's a Marmite film. Not everybody loves it, but I thought it was a really striking, remarkable film. I mean, and that was not an expensive film to make, but you go, well, that's a unique authored film where it stands out in the crowd. Portal, I mean, that's another great example of
Mm.
a film that's it wasn't a crazy budget. It was a bit of a leap, but it found an audience and did very, very well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Saltburn is mainly one location, isn't it? With the exception of, like the university shots at the beginning and stuff. It's mainly shot
Mm,
in that one house.
mhm,
Um, yeah, that's pretty good. I hope because of middle range films have kind of disappeared to an extent. Something that was like cost, I don't know what, 30 million, I guess would be a middle
mm.
range film. They've gone up. I had Gabriel Byrne on a couple of years, and he was saying about how In the Name of the Father wouldn't have been made today, probably.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? I think there's been like a golden age of television. Certainly in the last 5, 10 years, there's been some amazing TV series, and I think the stronger writer directors have moved into that arena more. But I think, as you say, that area between like the 10 to 30 million pound, um, thrillers or character pieces or contained dramas. There's not as many of them around. I do think what is interesting is that there's a new tax incentive that's come through for the UK where
I saw, yeah.
I think films sub £15 million will suddenly get a much better tax credit. And I think I think this country has needed to do something like that for a while to sort of help sort of galvanize the indie film industry over here, because I think in some respects I think we've got a brilliant we're the UK is a brilliant hub for facilitating big American movies. So many films and studios come over here and work in all the studios. I mean, if you look at places like Pinewood, Disney's taken it over for years and years. But the danger is that we sort of lose our own voice and we start becoming facilitators to bigger studio projects. And I think it's really important that those aspiring filmmakers that are coming through who do like to play in that area where it's not studio money, it's that sort of top indie money, will can thrive and find their own voice.
Because Shepperton is huge now, isn't it? I think was Barbie shot at Shepperton, or maybe Leavesden. I think it was Shepperton, but that's a huge. They've got these huge studios all sort of satellited
Yeah,
around London. I know Pinewood it's probably like double the size that it was. I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
I mean, in some respects, it's been a great thing because it sort of draws a lot of attention and to the country. I think it's kept people very busy. We're definitely a part of those films, but I think it's also important to make sure that we're getting to make those interesting UK based projects as well, because they've got as much chance of traveling overseas and finding an audience as the American projects.
Mm. So moving forward for you now, if you wanted to start, I remember you saying you had a few projects in mind. If you wanted to start making a film or put a film into production, what would you do as a
Mm.
director now to get that moving?
Well, I've I think the challenge is always trying to find time to keep pushing along your own projects amongst doing projects for other companies. And in the last year, I've actually spent quite a lot of time getting back in with producers and collaborators that I've had long-term relationships with, and we're in the process of writing scripts, putting them under the noses of production companies at the moment. It's interesting. There's quite a few out there that are all getting some traction at the moment, all in different genres. I mean, well, I'd say so. Predominantly, a lot of my work is, in the sort of the thriller horror category, but there's a couple of comedies in there as well that have got like a darker edge to it. But yeah, they're out there sort of doing the rounds, and it's a bit like having horses in the race. I think you in the past I used to get transfixed on maybe one project, and you cross your fingers and jump in and hope that was the one that would get some traction. But I think the smart thing to do is, have a number of things always just bubbling away. I mean, the truth is, things when they can happen very quickly, and you might get a phone call going, "We've got the money, and we're off to the races." And suddenly you're making a project, and it suddenly feels like, "Oh my God, we're already coming from behind, and we've only just got given the green light." But equally, things can move at such a glacial pace. There's a lot of waiting, a lot of time sort of trying to build the house of cards where you find finance, you try and attach cast, and you're slowly working to that point where the project's like a go project. So yeah, I'm keeping busy with that. So there's film projects, but there's also a number of TV projects. But they're quite ambitious things that might take a bit of money and a bit of commitment for people to really get behind.
Because I was doing a short with someone last year, we had to stop because there were some production issues and weather problems, and we ran out of money. So now we're just trying to source to get money, and it's like, where do you get money from? Like it's the old age, whatever stage you're at, whether it's Peter Jackson looking to make Lord of the Rings, everyone's always looking for the financing to make their project.
Do you know, having done this a few times, it always feels like I never quite know what the right point in to the process is. I think it always feels very chicken and egg, because you might have the script. So we have a couple of scripts that, in my view, they're ready to go out there and go into the market. But you might sit down with a financier, and the first question would be, "Great, who's attached to it?" And then you go across to the agent and say, "Well, we'd like your client to be involved," and they go, "Great, well, who's financing it?" Because they want to know the money's there. So it's always this thing of you have to sort of the project has to develop momentum. It's like the analogy of the snowball rolling down the hill, and things slowly stick to it, and it gathers mass, and then before you know it, it's like, oh, this is a real project now. This is actually starting to happen. But I don't think there's ever just one clean answer or way into getting a project made. I think trying to find finance at the moment is particularly difficult. It's been a difficult period, 2023. I think the industry is going through a phase of contraction where there seems to be a lot less made after something like an explosion of things being made in 2021, 2022. But these things always go in cycles, I think.
Yeah, and I think the writers' strike obviously had a bit of an impact. Even especially here, I don't think people realised how much of an impact that did have on the UK industry.
Yeah, the strikes I thought would be more isolated to being an American-based problem, but I think what it did is it opened my eyes to the fact that we're so tied now to the American market. I think so many projects are co-financed anyway. It's very rare that you'd find an ambitious TV series or drama that's not somehow co-financed with American money. And
is it PBS? Hotel Portofino?
Yeah, it's
PBS.
Yeah. So PBS, Foxtel, Sky, Italia, and ITV. But then then it gets sort of syndicated and sold to lots of other markets as well. But yes, I was going to say, lots of acting talent as well, based in the UK, because they are so aligned to America. A lot of big British big names weren't reading scripts and weren't really engaging in looking for new projects last year. So yeah, it really did slow things down for a while.
Is there a film you think? Tell me one of the films that you think is really underrated. So I started to join Letterboxd recently, which I've got addicted to, and I've made a list of underrated films. And I thought I'd start asking my guests if there's a film they think that is criminally sort of underrated that they love and they think is often looked over.
Do you know what? There's a favourite of mine that I actually got my friend to watch recently because he'd never seen it, and that's Ed Wood by Tim Burton.
Oh yeah, it's on Disney at the moment. Yeah, about the director.
Yeah. I don't know if you. Yeah, it's a really intriguing little film. I mean, it was probably one of Tim Burton's lesser-known films, but for my money, I think it's certainly as a director, it's a fascinating glimpse into what the world of trying to be a director is like. I mean, for people who don't know, it's basically a story about Ed Wood, who was a famous film director in the 1950s, and he wasn't actually famous at the time. He sort of became infamous for having made what is deemed as one of the worst movies of all time, called Plan 9 from Outer Space, which going back to that idea of making films on a shoestring with a plucky bunch of friends and collaborators. I mean, that film's about this like dysfunctional family relationship of all these characters trying to make this film, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's a lovely little film. I also really like Terry Gilliam's The Fisher King.
Oh yeah, with Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges. That's
Yeah,
great.
that's
Yeah.
it's a really intriguing film. It's just got lot of heart, and I think Terry Gilliam is always like he's a very creative and inventive film director. But I think that was one of his lovely mixture of his kind of wild sensibilities and the heart of the relationship between who was it now? Who are the two main actors
Robin
in it?
Williams and Jeff Bridges. I
Yes,
think it's
yes,
Jeff.
of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
No, that's right. Just a brilliant dynamic between them
Mm.
both. Yeah, love
Yeah,
that film.
Terry Gilliam's one who's not quiet about finding finance for his films. I think Don Quixote took him like he goes, this film wasn't made in 2 years. He goes, I've been making this film for 30 years. I've just been chasing it constantly.
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, that there was the Lost in La Mancha, which was the documentary made about him making that film, where um, I mean, if you've never, if the audience hasn't ever seen it, it's really worth a watch because he was making his film, the Man Who Killed Don Quixote, and you just see all the difficulties that a director could possibly have to face on a project where it was finance and actors falling ill and flash floods washing away the entire set and just crazy stuff you can really anticipate. So the fact that he just kept on going and still made his film 30 years later is amazing.
Yeah. I think it's going to sound a bit cliche, but I think Brazil is my favorite of his. Such a
Yeah,
crazy film.
it's
Such a
great.
crazy film.
I started watching it again the other day, and you kind of go, "How did this get made?" But you kind of admire it for just being a bit audacious,
Yeah,
and
like
that
Robert
it's
De
just
Niro
the
just pops
tone's
up, doesn't he,
nuts.
in the middle of it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's got a great cast, but it's that's very unique. Yeah. How
Yeah.
about yourself? What's your favorite gems?
This is so hard to answer. I love Stanley Kubrick. I love Stanley
Mm,
Kubrick. I would say Eyes Wide Shut is my favorite, and everyone has a go at me for that because they say it's a really unusual choice. But there's just
yeah.
something really. I like the idea of it being only it's set only over 3 or 4 days or something, and just this crescendo of it's like a tip. It's like a really specific character arc. How he just goes
Mm,
through this journey and then and the other side. And Paths of Glory. I like Paths of Glory as well, which
yeah.
actually influenced. There's some tracking shots in Brazil going through like the office at the beginning
Mm,
when they go to Ian Holmes' office at the end of the thing, and he talks about that and how that he sort of basically lifted it from that film. I think probably
it's
from
interesting. What you're talking about, Eyes Wide Shut. It's curious because that was one of those films where I went to it with really high expectations and came away kind of disappointed and not sure what to make of it. But then I revisited it a few years later and watched it again. And I think having having since been married and had a family, and I think having a bit of age in your belt, you go into the film with a different worldview to how you see the characters. And I thought, God, this is amazing. Like really, my whole opinion of it changed.
yeah, I think Kubrick's wife said to him he had it in his. It's based on a novella and a dream story, and I think he had it in his sort of back pocket several years before, and she was like, "I don't think you're ready for this
Mm.
yet. I think you need to be a little bit older." But yeah, it's something I see something different in each time. And I don't know what it is. It's just something because it's quite a long film and it's not particularly fast moving, but there's just something unnerving about it. Because I think a lot of the things, because you don't even know what's happening and it's not really concluded either. You're just kind of like,
Mm.
oh my God, this would be awful. Like, he's not like a spy or a cop. He's just a doctor. He's just sort of a
Yeah,
regular guy who's been
yeah.
thrown into this situation by chance. And so I really like that. There's just something really weird and unnerving about it. So
Mm.
I think that was my favorite. Do you have any guilty pleasure films you feel like you have to defend that you love?
Oh, goodness me, guilty pleasure. I do. I used to quite like Weekend at Bernie's. That was always quite funny.
I've not seen that. I've not seen it.
Weekend at Bernie's. It's about two young guys who goes to their boss's like Miami retreat, and he has this amazing uh, seafront apartment, and he dies, and they have to keep the pretense with all the guests that he's alive for the weekend. So it's like a farce where they're just dragging this body around from place to place, and they just get into all these ridiculous situations where they have to convince the person in the room that Bernie's still alive. Definitely worth a lot watch.
Yeah, I'll
Do you know
watch
what?
that.
There was another ridiculous film that was actually very entertaining called Joe's Apartment, which was an old MTV film from years and years ago. Must be about 25, 30 years old, but it's basically about a young guy who rents an apartment in New York, and the whole apartment is full of cockroaches.
Oh.
And this was just when like CGI was kind of breaking through, and they realized they could do all sorts of ridiculous things. And people are obviously sitting there going, "What can we do with CGI that would be entertaining?" So basically, this guy ends up finding himself living with this group of cockroaches who all happen to love musical numbers. So they've got sort of Busby Berkeley, MGM musical type numbers of all the cockroaches diving into a toilet and swimming together and doing all these song and dance routines. It's nuts.
How do you come up with that?
Joe's
It's so
apartment.
random. It's like, right, we're going to put this film together, and this is what happens.
I know, it's brilliant. Have a look on YouTube. It's worth seeing the musical numbers alone.
Yeah, excellent. I really love. It's not people. There is a huge fan base for it, and Alan Rickman won a BAFTA, but I love Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I absolutely adore. I think it's so good, and I know people have a go at Kevin Costner's accent, but I'm like, I don't care. Like, it's not anything. It's not invasive to the film, but I think it's just. I think maybe because I grew up with it. It was one of the earlier films that I saw. It came out in '91, so I was sort of like really young when it came out, and I've just watched it, and I think it's just like an absolute romp, like a proper swashbuckling. Like, but people really give it a hard time.
Rickman is just a genius in that film.
So good.
I mean, funnily enough, earlier on today, I was reading an article about that film, and it was saying that I think when Alan Rickman took the role, he wasn't really enamored with the part and didn't think it was, there was that much for him to do. So I think he had a friend who was a writer who came on board, and they actually started coming up with bits of script where he could ad lib and throw them in. And the director was on board with all of this, but he had like a whole kit bag of things that he wanted to try.
Yeah,
and
I think he said, "I'm not going to do that."
Not really. You're not really making everyone aware of what he was going to do, but it makes the film, doesn't it?
Yeah, so good, and it's got a proper ensemble cast as well. It's got amazing actors in there, and obviously Sean. In fact, the podcast you recommended to me, the Simon, is it Simon Burr?
Simon Brew.
Simon Brew. He's obsessed with Kevin Costner. He loves Kevin Costner, and I listened to the one he was talking about that and how I think Alan Rickman refused it to begin with, and then eventually he took it on and was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do a lot of this like awful dialogue. I'll just sort of put in my own things," and it works really well. And I think it's excellent.
That's the thing. It's like, if you go to the lengths of casting somebody like Alan Rickman, it's like just stand back and let them
do what you want.
do their thing. Don't get in the way of the process. Yeah.
And the final question is there a film you're ashamed you haven't seen?
You know what? Yeah, I try to see as many films as possible. There's always a few that pass you by. I mean, I actually, I'm ashamed to say, I only saw The Godfather for the first time about 4 years ago. And when I did, I was like, God, that's incredible. How did I miss that? It's one of those films that used to come on the TV and you'd see the end, and then next time you maybe catch the middle. And I felt like I'd seen it and just never really got around to it. I like to. I want to go back though and watch more movies from the 70s because there was a whole bunch that passed me by. I've never seen The Deer Hunter.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's good. Like I want to say Dog Day Afternoon.
Definitely Sidney Lumet. So good.
Yeah.
Amazing film. And Pacino at that time as well. Yeah, there's loads of those 70s. I just recommended that film to someone and they watched it and they said, "Oh, great recommendation. It was really, really good."
It was a great period because I think all those films are so vital and raw, and I think so many good performers like Gene Hackman and goodness, I'm a mind blank, but Sidney Lumet and just all these interesting characters were coming out of that period of time. Dustin Hoffman, I was going to say, Dustin Hoffman was incredible, but it's almost like it gets to the point where I think if you're flicking on a Friday night through Netflix and you feel like you hit saturation point with modern day projects, it's good to go back in time and sort of have a bit of a wallow in different periods because you get so much from it.
That's it. The majority of what I watch is really older because I guess there are more older films. There's so many films that come out now. I'm trying to keep up with. I've got like 20 to watch on a list, and then I'm like, oh, but I want to go and watch this from the 50s, which I haven't seen, or there's a couple of Hitchcocks which I haven't seen. But things like The French Connection. I mean, even William Friedkin said, like, I did some crazy stuff back then. He was going, even the guy driving the car at the chase scene at the end, he said, "Do you have any children?" He goes, "No." He goes, "Okay, good. You can do this." So that was the kind of mindset that he was doing. And he was going, "I'd never do that now. It's crazy." But But yeah,
I think a lot of younger people sort of have it in the mindset that they don't want to go back too far. I think films like Titanic are seen as being like an old film now. That's an
yeah,
old
that's
film,
so
and it's
weird to
like
say that.
that makes me feel old.
Yeah, I
It's
think
like
old is
no, you
more
need
than
to
like,
really go back.
yeah, like sort of 90 pre 1980 really. When people go, oh, this is really old, I'm like, it's not that old, it's only 40
Mm,
years old.
yeah,
I think old is like black and white sort of silent films, Battleship Potemkin or whatever. That's when I
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
stuff is old. But yeah, you do
But
realize.
well, one of my other favorites is Singing in the Rain. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
that's a great film. You know,
yeah,
it's sort
yeah,
of like if I put my list of top 10 together, you kind of go, well, that's an odd addition in there. But I think it's just like such a fun, colourful film. So you always try and get young film fans to go back and watch films like that. It's like go watch Singing in the Rain.
yeah, yeah. I
Have a
think
good
people
Sunday
there's
afternoon.
there's so much people miss as well. Like, and I always think, is there a film? I mean, it's a bit of a first world problem, but is there a film out there that I haven't seen that would end up being my favorite? And I start thinking about this, like, oh my God, this one here. Like, what if to watch this and it would suddenly change my life? And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But Adam, thank you very much for speaking to me. It's gone so quickly. It's been an hour now. It's crazy. I really appreciate you coming on. I've really enjoyed your work, and I look forward to. I haven't watched the second series of Portofino yet, so I'm looking forward to watching that. And
Yeah, it's worth a watch. Yeah.
yeah, it's excellent.
Thank you, and it's been great to talk to you, Oliver.
Yeah, and good luck with your next projects, and hopefully I'll see your films that you get off the ground pretty soon.
You too.
Cheers,
Cheers. Good to
Adam.
talk to you. Thanks,
Thanks
Oliver.
very much,
Bye.
Adam. See you later on.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye now. Bye bye.